The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to the Wyoming Women's Business Center's 2020 webinar series. Today's presentation is Improving Workplace Communication During COVID-19. I'm Christine Langley with the Wyoming Women's Business Center, and I'm going to be your speaker today. So everybody's going to notice that GoToWebinar control panel on the right side of your screen, and I just want to call attention to both the questions panel and the chat panel. If you've got questions or comments, I'd like you to use these panels to communicate with us during the presentation. And my colleague Teresa is on the line with us today, and she's going to help me manage your questions. So this webinar is being recorded. It's going to be available on our YouTube channel. So all you need to do is go to youtube.com and type in Wyoming Women's Business Center, and make sure you subscribe and check out our other webinars too. You can also visit us at wyomingwomen.org or look for us on Facebook and Instagram. So immediately following this presentation, we're going to launch a survey. And I ask that everybody complete the survey because it provides us, as well as our funding partners, with a bunch of valuable information. It doesn't take long. All participants are muted to minimize background noise today. And so once again, if you have any questions or comments during the presentation, just go ahead and type them in the chat box or the questions panel. So today's agenda, we're going to start out just giving you a little background on Wyoming Women's Business Center so you know who we are. And then we'll move right into our topic and we'll finish up the day with some Q&A. So the WWBC is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to enable and empower Wyoming entrepreneurs with a special emphasis on women who are economically or socially disadvantaged. And we do that through 3 distinct programs. So the first is our business counseling and training program, which is always free. The second is our microfinance programs, which offer both microloans and individual development accounts. And then the third is the artist development program, and we run that in conjunction with our Works of Wyoming store and Art Connect gallery in downtown Laramie. So this webinar series today is brought to you by our microfinance program, and I want to call special attention to our microloan program here on the slide. We can provide loans for those unable to get loans through traditional means up to $50,000. So if you need more information on that, you can contact our microlending director, Waldo Smith. Okay, everybody, this is me. I'm a business counselor with the WWBC, and I've been working directly with Wyoming entrepreneurs for over 10 years. I'm a business owner and real estate investor myself, and I've been helping clients launch, improve, and expand their online presence for many years, and also work remotely myself. So before we dive into our topic today on improving workplace communication, I see I've got over 30 people in attendance right now. Excellent. I'm going to launch a quick poll just so I understand exactly what role you play in your business. And so what is your role or your job in your company? Are you the business owner or entrepreneur? Are you a manager or team lead where you have some direct reports? Are you an employee or team member? Or are you an independent contractor? And in some ways, independent contractors are also basically their own business, right? They're business owners too. But I threw that in just to see what my audience was today. Now, regardless of how you answer this question, I think you're going to get some valuable recommendations today. We specialize in Wyoming small and micro business support. So a lot of the information is going to be weighted towards entrepreneurs and managers. But again, regardless of your role, my hope is that you'll share some of these tips with your colleagues and get some value. So let's go ahead and see what we got here. Okay, kind of an even split here between business owners, managers, and employees. So thanks everybody for joining us today. Appreciate it. And let's go ahead and dive right in. So when people meet in person for the first time, there's certain unwritten rules. And we all know this, right? So we expect people to behave with propriety and some level of decorum. And if you ignore these rules, then you risk coming across as rude or arrogant or really just a little strange. And that can damage any potential for the relationship really before it's even begun. So with online communication, it works in a similar way. And we have a similar set of standards, and those standards we call netiquette. So, in many ways, the importance of netiquette exceeds that of in person etiquette because, unlike a fleeting acquaintance that you might have, the internet actually creates a permanent record of ineffective or offensive interactions, and those can haunt you or your business well into the future. So, your online reputation counts, and especially in today's new world where most business activity is going to be taking place online. So, let's take a look at this list. First off, seems kind of obvious, but you do want to be as polite as you would in an offline encounter. Acknowledge other people's privacy, respect their time, and try to include the simple greetings and salutations to make people feel safe and respected. You know, you wouldn't typically start an in-person conversation without something like a hi, how are you? So don't skip it online. That being said, it's a good idea to bring some grace and forgiveness to all of your online engagements. And I say this because people are going to break these rules when they communicate with you. And so I'd encourage you to first assume that they didn't mean for the interaction to create a negative response or a negative reaction in you, because most people truly want positive working relationships. And so the key here is really to improve your own skills and processes so that you can model it for others. All right, humor and sarcasm. So, what's wrong with those? Well, unfortunately, they can backfire depending on the strength of your relationship with your audience. So, when in doubt, leave it out. Same thing goes with using all caps or strong language, because this really implies that you're screaming or you're upset. And so, unless that's your direct intention, then I'd encourage you to leave that out as well. Sometimes people like to end communication with an ellipsis. You might notice this when people send you text messages, right? It's 3 periods in a row. Now, grammatically, ellipsis is used when you're omitting a word or a phrase or a paragraph from like a quoted passage. But generally in online communication, the use is essentially asking the receiver of the message to fill in the text. It's sort of like asking a question of, what do you think? Or how would you end this? Unfortunately, it can come across as kind of coy and maybe even flirty. And you don't want to be either one of those things in a work environment. So just be careful about using unfinished messages because it leaves too much open for interpretation. All right, when writing responses, you want to be sure to thoroughly address all the issues that were presented to you. And in some situations, it's possible to anticipate sort of what the follow-up questions are going to be that somebody's going to ask. So if you can write a complete answer, then the communication is going to go faster and it'll be more efficient. So a bit of preparation is going to go a long way. You might fail to provide complete answers to questions because you didn't actually take the necessary time to read and absorb and understand what the other person is saying or asking. So how many times have you sent an email to someone with, a list of questions or several questions, and the person replies to only one of like your 3 questions? So as a general rule, you should always provide answers to the basic questions. And those are who, what, when, where, why, how. So kind of go through those in your mind when you're responding and make sure you're giving as complete an answer as possible. And that'll help reduce the back and forth. So if you're uncertain about the meaning of someone's concern or the issue they've raised, then don't be afraid to ask for clarification, right? It's always better to ask first than to regret later or build in a bunch of assumptions that maybe are incorrect. And most online communication uses the written word. We know this: email, chat, forums, discussions, social media comments, all of this is the written word. And therefore, a good working knowledge of vocabulary and grammar is essential. And so if in doubt, always check. Now, business owners might want to consider offering some kind of ongoing training opportunities to employees who need to improve their writing skills. Because when team members write better, they present an improved professional image for their company, and communication within the workplace can also improve. And so everyone's online communication can always be improved just through the simple act of proofreading. And so checking for things like grammar and punctuation errors, poor sentence structure, incorrect use of tenses, right, spelling errors or typos. The hardest thing about proofreading is that it's tough to proofread your own writing. So a technique that I use is I'll save my emails as a draft, and then I go back to it in 15 minutes or sometimes even an hour later to proof it. Because stepping away from it for a little bit can help you find your errors faster. And then lastly, try to match the replies to people in length and tone. So for example, if someone gives you a phrase, some kind of message or praise, they're praising you, and that praise is 6 sentences long, when you reply with a thanks or a yep, it kind of makes you look like a jerk, right? They spent some considerable time putting together that message, and you responded with like one word. So instead, focus on adding some substance to your reply that actually shows you care. Something like, thanks, that really means a lot to me to hear that. Or, yes, I've been thinking about that too, and I appreciate you reaching out. So again, matching the length and tone. It's going to take a few seconds longer, but it's worth the time in order to maintain and improve that workplace relationship, especially when the majority of that relationship is going to happen online. Okay, now that we've covered the basics of netiquette, let's dig a little bit deeper into online communication skills and tools. So when you write content, it's important to write in a style that your audience is going to enjoy reading. And what that means is watching your tone and your copy and your jargon. So let's start with tone. So before you start writing, I want you to ask yourself if the piece of copy is formal or conversational. So the writing style is going to be different depending on your audience. And it's important to write in the tone that your audience is going to respond best to. And the next step is copy. Now, when it comes to copy, clarity is always king. If you can explain something complex in a simple and easy to understand way, then you're doing it right. So you want to forget about the fancy lingo and the word of the day injections, because really nobody wants to look up a word that you used in the dictionary to understand what your message was, right? No one has ever complained that a less complicated word was used in place of a less common one. And then finally, jargon. So too much industry or technical jargon can kind of end up alienating audiences that are unfamiliar with that specific terminology. And so instead of using technical terms, when necessary, you want to aim to keep your content as accessible as possible. And so I always say with acronyms as well, a lot of workplaces, especially if you work in, government or any form of government, we use a lot of acronyms. And so you want to start with the entire phrase and then follow that up with the acronym in brackets. And then as you go forward in your text, then you could just use it. So for example, we might want to type out the entire word search engine optimization, and then in brackets, you're going to add SEO. And that way readers know exactly what you're referring to later in the text when you start using just SEO. Okay, our next key point is to break up your text. So a long page of unbroken copy is going to put readers off. And so you want to use subheadings and bullet points and numbered lists to break up your content into really digestible chunks that look a lot less daunting on the screen, right? How many times have we opened up an email and just gotten overwhelmed just by the structure of all the text that isn't broken up and said to ourselves, yeah, I'm going to read that later. And you just close it out, right? And maybe flag it for a different time because you can't even handle looking at it. That's not how the communication should be sent from you, right? You should be doing it better. So use this especially when you're asking questions. I also want you to consider using videos and images frequently. So images and videos can really improve your online communication skills. Images can include things like GIFs or emojis or memes or screenshots. So remember, it's 2020, right? It's perfectly normal to incorporate these things into your conversations. And studies are even showing now that they can actually help people you're talking with remember more of what you said. All right, next up is posting on social media. So be careful to avoid the long, rambling post. You really have 3 to 5 seconds to get your message across. So this is another instance where you want to be concise. All right, gathering more information before a final reply. So whether you're a manager or an employee, it's always a good idea to gather more information. There's a whole bunch of assuming that goes on in online conversations, like I mentioned before, and primarily because we're missing all the nonverbal cues we get when we're face to face. So I encourage you to be sure you have all the information you need to respond, and that may mean extending this email or chat into several posts or back and forth communication before coming to your conclusion or your answer. That style also helps engagement levels with remote employees or coworkers because it feels more like a conversation and less like just a Q&A post, right? So remember, your online engagements need to feel as human as possible. All right, last but not least, sometimes saying nothing is actually best. So be sure that you don't put on some kind of show for thousands of people or even just your other coworkers or staff by arguing with someone publicly online excessively, right? As a manager or a business owner, you want to remember that sometimes people use online communication to express their feelings, and responding isn't necessary and may not serve you in the future. Now, conversely, if you really have something that needs to get addressed and settled, then take it to a private chat or even better, a phone call. I cannot tell you the number of employee squabbles I've broken up just by forcing the two people to talk on the phone, right? So many times it's just a simple misunderstanding. But people tend to read a lot into messages, especially if there's some kind of negative history going on there. So just be mindful that if there's too much back and forth, just pick up the phone. All right, so now that we've gone through some of these skills, I want to launch another poll and just see what is resonating with you around what we've talked about. So I know I need to work on what? Breaking up your text and making more of my writing more concise, enhancing my communication with images, gathering more information before my final reply, or just really saying nothing and being quiet. I can tell you right now, nobody's alone. Whatever answer you come up with, there's someone that's in your camp. All right, let's close that out and take a look. Again, pretty even across the board of what people need to work on. And so that's just a good reminder about things that you're going to want to put into practice. Okay, let's jump into workplace tools and software. So if you don't supply yourself and your colleagues with the online tools and software to improve engagement, that means you're working on outdated technology that was really never meant to create or build community within your remote workplace. So if all you offer employees is an email account, then the communication among your remote staff is going to be slow, it's going to be formal, and it's going to be hard to track. And so how many times and how long, for example, has it taken you to search your inbox for a particular email chain that discussed a certain topic, right? It's just really annoying. And there's an app for that. So when we think about improving communication, the tools you offer really count. And I've tried to make a list on this screen, just identifying the most common tools you should be offering and using. So first up is something for messaging and chats. And so Slack is one of the most popular applications right now, but there's plenty of others if you do some online searches. Slack can handle quick instant messaging for small businesses on their free version. And then you'll have to upgrade if you want the communication to be saved for longer periods of time. It's really reliable. It's really easy for new users. It also has some fun add-ons like Giphy's GIF Finder, that can enhance your messaging and add those images that we talked about earlier. And Slack is really, it's so big at this point that the number of third-party integrations is just gigantic, and it's growing all the time. So there's lots more this app can do than just messaging. All right, the next tool that I highly recommend is a video conferencing system. And so Zoom is really all the rage right now, but GoToMeeting and Skype are also popular options. So again, do your own research based on your business needs. Document collaboration and file sharing, these are fairly common with tons of different options. So again, if you're trying to work on team projects remotely, this capability is just, it's a requirement. And so long gone are the days of emailing documents back and forth and everybody having their own version on their laptop, right? So the leader in this space is right now is clearly Google Drive. Lots of people are already familiar with Google Drive because they've used the platform's 15 gigabytes of free storage space for backing up their personal files. And so when you have a program that's already familiar to a lot of people, that can help organizations choose a platform and minimize the learning curves among the people that are trying to implement. Data is automatically synced with all devices that are linked to the account, and the changes are saved automatically. You can set up permissions for viewing or editing, and others even outside the organization can be invited to view or download or collaborate without having to attach anything to an email. Documents, images, spreadsheets, all that can be organized really easily. And then, of course, Google's known for their integrated search feature. So if you're having trouble finding a file, that, of course, helps you. Now, other well-known options in that space are companies like OneHub or Microsoft OneDrive or Dropbox Business. Again, do your own research. Lots of these tools can start to overlap with each other because they've all tried to add features similar to other communication tools that are in the market to make themselves more competitive. And so what I really suggest is that you issue a survey to your employees and try to identify the features that are going to be most important to your team. And remember that there's often a difference between kind of fantasy tools and the reality of the implementation of those tools. A lot of times companies will buy software that they don't need or they don't end up actually implementing and using, really because they just lacked communication and alignment between the managers or the decision makers and then the users. There was actually a study in 2016 that found 41% of the software that's on our computers goes unused. And that doesn't even count the software that technically you use, but you don't actually fully utilize. That's a whole nother category. And then lastly, there's some specific project management software or knowledge-based tools that can be specific to your industry, and those can make sense too. But generally speaking, if any of these tools improve your communication and your collaboration, then ultimately it's also going to improve your bottom line because it just makes you more efficient. All right, it's hard to talk about workplace communication without addressing the elephant in the room. And this elephant is really the manager that's responsible for leading the charge when it comes to communication. And so whether that's in person or online, the manager is really important. So let's just take a step back and talk about the level of talent that's required to be a great manager. What is it that great managers do? What makes them great? And so the first thing is they motivate every single employee to take action and to engage employees with a compelling mission and vision. They have assertiveness to drive outcomes and the ability to overcome adversity and resistance. They create a culture of clear accountability, right? There's very little confusion. They build relationships that create trust, open dialogue, and provide full transparency. And lastly, they make decisions. And those decisions are based on productivity, not politics. But if a manager doesn't have the talent to individualize and focus on each person's needs and strengths and review their team members and rally people around a cause and execute efficient processes, then the day-to-day experience is really going to burn out both the manager and the team members. So regardless of your online communication strategies, the management talent needs to be in place, or there has to be a commitment there to try and improve. So in the spirit of improvement, let's talk about the specific things that you can do to improve your management capabilities with your team, and specifically when you're trying to manage them remotely. So first and foremost is to set clear expectations, because confusion is the enemy of remote workers. It's difficult to correct course on a work assignment if you aren't able to physically observe what's going on, right? So how many times as a manager or a business owner have you noticed or overheard one of your employees walking somewhere or speaking to someone, and you dive in and just correct the situation right there in the moment? So that can't happen anymore, right? So clarification of duties and clear assignments and deadlines is becoming really, really important now. And so next, you want to try and treat remote employees just like they're local, or in this case, maybe even like they're sort of inside your home office. You want to give remote people as much access to you as possible. And remember, people used to see you in the halls, and they used to eat lunch with you or stop by your office. And so remote people just don't have that access, and they can feel really distant. So that's why the messaging software and the video chats can be really powerful. And you need to be prepared to respond to your employees as quickly as possible, and remember to engage regularly. And when I say regularly, I really mean daily, because you have to engage your remote workers on a daily basis through some kind of communication, right? It doesn't always have to be a video call, but it's best to use really multiple channels to communicate, because this constant interaction and engagement, it's going to help remote workers feel included, and it'll help you feel like you know what's going on. So you're going to want to schedule video-based meetings, and I think it is incumbent, especially with virtual employees, to schedule time and look at one another when you're speaking. So we use Zoom to work with our clients and our employees. If you don't schedule time to talk with one another, then the silence can just get really loud and a little dangerous. You never want your remote employees wondering about their performance and kind of questioning their value. So as we think about the types of meetings that we can commit to, I want to launch another quick poll and just see, how many video-based meetings do you think you can commit to weekly? And this is going to differ depending on the situation that you're in, right? So maybe you have 5 direct reports and you think, well, I could schedule one meeting with one employee each day. And so that would be daily, right? Or maybe you don't have that many employees. You've got 2 employees and you think if you talk to each one of them once on a video-based meeting, but then maybe did one team meeting in addition to individual one-on-ones, that might be 3 days or 3 times per week. So just kind of take your best guess on what you think you could commit to. All right, and again, pretty unique to everybody's situation, but I'm encouraged to see that 36% say, hey, I think I could do some kind of video online check-in every single day. That's awesome. All right, so the success of managing a remote workforce really comes down to trusting your team. And sometimes companies aren't willing to embrace a remote workforce because there's this uncertainty about whether or not the work is going to get completed at the same level as if they were in the office. And so, unfortunately, those days are just over, right? And we've got to embrace our new reality. So, a few things that you can do to combat this belief, especially if it's one of your own beliefs, is first, set up some work from home guidelines. So examples of guidelines are things like emails have to be responded to within 24 hours, or you agree to use text or messaging apps for urgent concerns. Another one could be no phone calls after 5 p.m. to make sure teammates aren't working around the clock. So come up with guidelines that make sense for your business, because we want this to feel inclusive, and the video conference meetings can really help. I'd also recommend some staff partnerships, meaning find some opportunities for staff or employees to partner on projects so that they have to communicate. And remember, there's going to be a ramp up period here that needs to be filled with clear steps and expectations and check ins to really ensure that this new way of working is being fully embraced. So, as you embrace your remote workforce, it's going to be important to manage expectations and really stay focused on goals. And so, don't worry as much about what's being done when, and instead concentrate on what's being accomplished overall. So, if we're meeting our goals, then great. If not, we need to look into the situation further. But it's all about accomplishment at this point, not necessarily activity. And so this one's really hard for those taskmasters out there because that style just won't work with remote employees. And so it's time to evolve. You're going to need to be intentional about creating a remote workforce atmosphere of engagement, but also genuine connection. And so make each team meeting count and have intentional purpose and opportunities to engage and contribute in a variety of different ways, right? So intentionality is an essential practice, but especially when you can't readily see the people that you're engaged with. So, okay, what does that mean? If you need to have intentional purpose in meetings and get engagement, that means you're going to have to plan the meeting. You're going to have an agenda. You have to let people know ahead of time that you're going to ask for engagement from them on certain topics. And so for those of us that used to wing it in some kind of a hallway meetup, that's not going to work anymore. And your engagement is going to require a lot more preparation on your part. So in that spirit, managing a productive team remotely really begins with a strategy for communication. So first, you're going to want to arrange the appropriate number of weekly formal report-ins. And then second, you want to set those guidelines about the daily needs. And some people work better with a shopping list of questions and thoughts, while others maybe like more of a trickle. And so you're going to have to understand, what's urgent and what's not, and how individual employees are going to respond. And everyone needs to understand the priority list. So another tip is to figure out how to avoid multitasking. And this is tough. Video conferences instead of phone conferences can work well because you can actually see what's going on with the person. But it discourages people basically to send emails or kind of tune out during the meetings if their video cam is on. Have you ever had somebody text message during an in-person team meeting? It can be really distracting and frankly, it's a little rude. So you just want to be sure that the people that are on your meetings are actually engaged. And again, planning out that meeting and making sure that they have a role in that meeting can really help with that. So another online communication tip is beware of using the quote reply all feature in an email or adding too many people to an email. I call them gang email messages. So email trails with extensive lists of people can really stifle productivity. And I find that it tends to peak on Fridays for some reason. I think it's because people are trying to move all of the work off of their plate before the weekend. So send a note to whoever actually needs it and try to limit your gang email messages. All right, our next point is connecting goals. And the world is shifting quickly into a workforce interested in learning and skills advancement rather than stability. Although I know a lot of people that would love both. So the bottom line is that working for 30 years for the same company is really unusual now. And so in light of that, you want to try to take a personal interest in your team's learning and their life goals. And in your meetings, you can take a moment to connect their interests to the goals of your business. Engagement and performance are going to stay a lot higher if you can pull this off and figure out how to do that. And then finally, establishing close bonds is going to be really imperative because you're not going to get all the nonverbal cues that you're accustomed to relying on. Remember to empathize and appreciate their life by talking about family and shared interests or beliefs. Check in using one of these collaboration tools, the shared documents and spreadsheets, phone calls, chat, video, and make it a point to invest in the relationship. Try to show you're supportive of their success by using questioning strategies to help them achieve their goals rather than just checking on their progress and numbers. One of the hardest things about being a remote worker is when your leadership or your boss calls you and just wants the down and dirty status update. So just be mindful that you listen more than you talk, because that's what good managers do. Okay, I'd be remiss if I didn't touch on tools for monitoring employee work, because this is something that comes up often. It may not be applicable to all businesses or to everybody on the call, but with the right employee monitoring software, you can really keep track of your remote workforce. Now, these tools can be a double-edged sword, right? Because they can monitor how much time a remote worker spends on a specific task or site or app. It can help you get a better idea of what they're up to during the work hours. But conversely, it can also feel a little intrusive. And depending on the type of work, it can damage the trust in the working relationship. So these systems are a lot more common for professionals who are billed hourly for client work. So think architects, engineers, accountants, attorneys, but if you've got substantial concerns about productivity that you just cannot resolve through management and communication skills, then it may be worth looking into these programs. And really a simple Google search is going to give you a ton of options. And there's even review sites that can run down a list of different options for this type of software. All right, I want to close today by just helping you remember a few things when you start to feel overwhelmed. And I think we've all felt a bit overwhelmed in the last month. First off, I want you to know that humans have always had the same problems. Okay, so you're not alone. We keep hearing this. And people have struggled with the same problems for years. So every day, millions of people conquer overwhelming feelings and they come out happy and alive on the other side. And it's really because we're built to overcome and to succeed. We simply are not built to fail. And so feeling overwhelmed is a natural part of life, but dwelling on that feeling can be really dangerous. And so you have to believe that you can overcome. And if for any reason right now your belief is in short supply, then I just want to encourage you to call someone that can encourage you, like me or other business counselors at WWBC or good friends or coworkers, whoever you know in your life that can be encouraging and uplifting. Next step is remembering that many times what you're experiencing is actually a breakdown of thoughts. It's not a breakdown of your actual life. And so our minds can be really powerful, and we've got the power also to control our thoughts. And so as a result, we can control who we are. And so when you're feeling overwhelmed, your life isn't falling apart, your thoughts are. And there's a difference. So take a minute to find and clean out all your self-deprecating thoughts, right? All those negative thoughts. I call this my saboteur voice. And as you do this, you're going to find yourself feeling refreshed and invigorated, and you're going to have renewed energy because you get all those negative thoughts out of the way. Sometimes I just write them all down and then ask myself, is that true? And 99% of the time, they're not true. Maybe you're feeling overwhelmed with a project at work, or you don't think you have the energy or the time to finish it. You start letting yourself play out every little negative scenario, resulting from a failed project. That's when you want to just stop. Because sitting on the couch and dwelling on all those thoughts, it's not going to make anything better. In fact, it usually makes it worse. And so it's amazing how things seem to fall into place if you'll just chip away at a project. You come to realize it actually wasn't as bad as you thought. So I encourage you to just start doing something, even if you don't have the plan fully developed, it'll come. And so if there's one thing that most of us have learned in the past month, it's that your problems aren't always as bad as you think, right? The best way to find out how good you actually have it is to take a break from worrying about your own life and do something really kind for someone that's in a worse spot than you. And so helping people that are worse off, puts your own problems into perspective, and it can help you feel a lot less overwhelmed. And then finally, I think it's always important to be grateful for what you do have. A lot of times the things you have right now are actually things you worried about having in the past. And the truth about humans is that we really do want to see other people succeed. There's a whole bunch of love and support out there in the world for you, and you just have to recognize it because, us humans, we just love the success stories. And so be sure to see and appreciate everything that you've got right now. And for all you list makers out there, start that gratefulness journal you've been putting off. You have so much more than you know. Okay, guys, we've got some time for questions. If people have any questions going on from today's webinar, I do have a tendency to be thorough, but I'll give you a few minutes to log in some questions. If you have some specific scenarios that you were wondering about, I'm happy to answer those on the fly. And while you guys type in questions, if you have any, I do want to recognize some of our funding partners here. The Women's Business Center, were made possible through primarily the Small Business Administration and the Wyoming Business Council. And so, of course, we're thankful for their support and their guidance. And this is our contact information for WWBC. So these are our business counselors. My contact information is on here. If you'd like to reach out to me directly, you're welcome to. And Jonathan Howdyshell is also a great resource as a business counselor. And then when we close today's webinar, we are going to launch that survey that I talked about at the beginning of the call. And so I'd ask that everybody hang out to respond to that. Okay, Teresa, I pulled up this question panel and it doesn't look like I have many questions.
No, I think that's what I'm seeing too.
Excellent. That's my thoroughness. So there's a blank here on this next webinar. We do have another webinar coming up 2 weeks from now on Thursday, and we'll be sending out email information for that. We're going to try and do content every 2 weeks going forward. And so everyone will get that information. And we thank everybody for attending today. When I close out, again, this webinar is going to launch, or the survey is going to launch. And so I ask you to just hang on the line and answer those questions for us. Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend.